And we are back. More coverage of CPAC 2021 here with the Jacob Kersey program, and I'm excited to have Hans von Spakovsky from the Heritage Foundation over here on the show. He is the manager of the Heritage Foundation's Election Law Reform Initiative, and he is an authority on many things, including civil rights, civil justice, the First Amendment, and immigration. Hans, thank you so much for coming over here today.
Well, I appreciate you inviting me on.
So when you look around at last year, and
Right.
even running over into this year, there are a lot of people, especially on the right, who have concerns about America's election integrity.
Right.
And those concerns are being dismissed by social media giants and big tech companies, and even politicians on the left and celebrities on the left. They're saying that those concerns are nothing but conspiracy theories, nothing but people whining because they lost. But I have to tell you, there are a lot of people I know who could care less who won, whether it was Trump or Biden, but they're really concerned about future elections because they noticed a lot of irregularities this past election. You've been studying election integrity and been looking at it before 2020 elections. You were looking at it back in 2018. So what have you been seeing with our election system? Can Americans trust America's election process?
Well, at the moment, that trust is a bit shaky, and it should be. And the reason for that is that our election system these days is filled with security holes and vulnerabilities that, unfortunately, people are willing to take advantage of. And anybody who doubts that or believes this narrative myth that the left pushes that, there's no election fraud in the country, I suggest you go to the Heritage website, where we now maintain an election fraud database. It is a database of proven election fraud cases from across the country. It's not even a comprehensive list. It's just a sampling. We're now up to 1,311 proven cases from across the country. And by proven, I mean somebody was convicted in a court of law of engaging in fraud, or a judge ordered a new election because of fraud. So these aren't just unsubstantiated claims. I mean, these are real cases. And what they show is all kinds of, like I said, vulnerabilities in our system. As an example, look, we have everything in the database from people who are not U.S. citizens registering and voting. We have people who are dead credited with voting after they're already dead. We have people who got registered in more than one state and illegally voted in more than one state, casting multiple elections. I mean, it's just one thing after another like that, and unfortunately, many states don't have the procedures in place to prevent that from happening.
So Heritage has a database, you said,
yes,
over 1,000 just samples of proven voter fraud cases.
Correct.
This is just a sample, not even a comprehensive list. That just blows my mind. Now, why is this partisan? Why is it partisan, right now when you have proven cases of people voting in more than one state illegally? Why is this a partisan issue?
Well, it's really odd. It used to not be a partisan issue. And in fact, if you go back 30 years, you'll find many of these cases were actually uncovered by enterprising reporters, working for major newspapers. But in the last 30 years, the ideological left has decided that they've got to deny election fraud exists, because that way they can oppose any of the reforms that folks want to put in place to fix these problems. And the media has just gone along with that. And that's why, for example, when states put in, like I said, a common sense reform that Americans overwhelmingly support, voter ID, the left goes all out to stop that. And you see media saying, there's no reason for voter ID law because there's just no fraud in elections, which is simply not true, that we don't have fraud. And so they use that as a way of opposing reforms and for actually getting rid of some of the basic safety protocols that we have in place to try to prevent fraud.
So can you help me understand something? So when I look back at 2016,
right,
I remember the same people who are saying there's no voter fraud today. Back in 2016, we're talking about Russia collusion and how Russia intervened in the election and helped Donald Trump win.
Right.
How are they getting away with changing the tune like that? Because for 3.5 years, it was Russia collusion and the fraud. Russia was involved with the last election, and then all of a sudden now it's magically, there's no voter fraud. How are they getting away with that shift in tone so easily?
Well, when you have the big social media platforms on your side, when you have most of the media on your side, it gives them the ability to come up with the story, frankly, I would label it as propaganda, that they want to propagate. And then they figure, well, if we keep repeating the same thing over and over and over again, people will begin to believe it's the truth. But it's not the truth. And not only does our database prove it, but, in 2008, the U.S. Supreme Court, for the first time, upheld a voter ID law that had been passed by Indiana. And in upholding it, they said, look, the U.S. has a long history of voter fraud. It's been documented by journalists, historians, and it could make the difference in a close election. And that, of course, is the key. It might not make the difference in an election somebody wins by a wide margin, but in a close election, it could make the difference. Like, I don't know if you all remember this, but remember 2018 congressional elections across the country? One congressional race was overturned. North Carolina, 9th Congressional District. Why was it overturned? Because of absentee ballot fraud perpetrated by a political consultant and his staff, all of whom got indicted and criminally charged, and the State Board of Elections, after investigating it, overturned the election. They had to hold a new election.
Wow. Now, are you sure Facebook's fact checkers have verified that that's true?
They have a hard time denying that one, since the State Board of Elections said, no, we got to have a new election, and they had a new election.
But that was only 2 years ago. It's
right.
2020, and if you say anything about voter fraud on social media, you could be banned.
I know. It's because they don't want to talk about it. Look, you want something more recent? Last summer, right before the November election, they had a municipal city council election in Paterson, New Jersey. Same thing happened. There was apparently widespread absentee ballot fraud, and a judge overturned the election of one of the members of the city council, and the state attorney general, who's a Democrat, criminally charged 4 locals, including one of the candidates, with engaging in absentee ballot fraud. And has anybody heard about that? No, there's not a lot of publicity or media coverage given of that.
And if people try to share it, they probably were banned.
Yeah, they could be, yes.
Right, canceled. So I guess my next question is, because a lot of people want this to be fixed.
Right.
And a lot of people just want to have trust in the election. At this point, even for me, it's beyond just, Donald Trump didn't get elected, we got Joe Biden. It's beyond that. It's, I want to trust America's election process, and I want my children and my grandchildren to be able to have faith in America's election system. So maybe over the next, I don't know, I'll give you a time frame, 6 to 12 months, what do we need to do here in America to ensure that the midterms coming up in 2022, that people trust that election process?
There are 2 things. Good question. 2 things that need to be done. The first immediate thing is to stop a bill that is working its way through Congress right now. It's called H.R. 1. Nancy Pelosi is bringing it to the floor actually first week in March without committee hearings, which tells you they really want to get it through fast. H.R. 1 is a complete federal takeover of the administration of elections, taking the power away from the states, which have run elections since the beginning of our history, and it imposes all these terrible mandates and does really bad things like, say, any state that has a voter ID law in place, you can no longer enforce it. So they've got to stop H.R. 1. Hopefully that can be stopped. Yeah. If that's the case, then what also needs to happen right away is, remember, most states, their state legislatures are meeting right now. Most states, they meet the first quarter of the year. Right now, those states need to be amending their election laws to fix these problems. And if they're not sure what to do, the Heritage Foundation, where I work, we just released a fact sheet that is our best practices recommendations for state election laws. It's basically a recipe, a menu, for how states should handle absentee ballots, voter registration, everything. You follow this in your state legislatures, and you'll have the best election system and one you can have confidence in.
That's great. And a lot of the audience is looking at America right now, and they're praying that, like, that House bill that you mentioned can be stopped. But, since conservatives are not in power in Washington, how are we going to stop something like that from being passed?
Well, I would tell you two things about that. First of all, take the frustration and anger you're feeling about what happened last year and channel it into trying to stop H.R. 1. And the way to do it is, one, contact your state legislators and tell them, hey, you need to be talking to our members of the House and our senators in Washington, tell them to not vote for this. And it doesn't matter whether they're Republican legislators or Democratic legislators, because what they should be saying to them is, look, you may or may not like, as a Democrat, for example, you may or may not like provisions in H.R. 1, but you should resent the idea that Washington is going to tell us how to run elections in our state. State legislators, whether they're Democrats or Republicans, ought to be saying, look, we're the ones who are going to decide how to run elections in our state, not folks in Washington. And that's a way of talking, like I said, to the Democratic side of the aisle. But I would do everything I can, call Congress, bring their switchboard down, phone them, phone your congressman, email them, send them letters saying, do not pass H.R. 1.
Yeah, we've got a lot of work to do, especially in my home state of Georgia. Definitely going to be working on that. And so, right. Hans, I appreciate you coming on today. Can you tell my audience who wants to get involved and who wants to know more how they can connect with what you're doing at Heritage, right, and also the Heritage database you mentioned?
Yeah, just go to heritage.org, heritage.org, and if you click on issues, you can bring up election integrity, and it's got everything. It's got the database, it's got our recommendations for state laws, it's got our facts about H.R. 1 and why it's a terrible bill. All that's right there.
Yeah, and this is far more than just President Donald Trump winning or losing. This is America's election system, right, for future generations. This is such an important issue, especially in a great nation like America. We need to ensure that the American people and future generations have confidence in our election system. So thank you so much for what you and the Heritage Foundation are doing.
Thanks a lot for having me, and hey, I appreciate the work you're doing on this too.
Thank you.